Hi everyone, welcome back to Gaming. I'm Oricon, your guide to the best video games, card games, and pop culture in general. And today's Halloween. So, this is actually my favorite holiday. I am just in love with the spooky season, and I wanted to give that love out a little bit by talking about my top 10 favorite horror video games. Um, so, disclaimer, these are just my favorites. It's not trying to be an objective list or anything. It's going to be mostly older stuff because I'm an old fart and these are the games I grew up with. And because my setup is not that great, there aren't going to be any fancy graphics or footage or anything. I'm just going to be talking about the games. But hopefully you'll get what you'll understand what I'm talking about and maybe pick the game up from my recommendation. So let's just get started. Awesome. First up is a game called Stories Untold. Now this was on PC a couple years ago and just recently came to modern consoles. I have it on Switch. And it's a ode to text adventure games of the past. There's a big 80s love letter type of Stranger Things vibe to it, and it's about a person playing an old video game, basically. An old text adventure, and things get progressively weirder from there. I'm not going to go into the story very much because it's spoilery, but it's a really nice mystery, and I was a little too young to play those text adventure games, the MUDs from the 80s, growing up, but it's always just something interesting to me. Like, there's this idea of outdated technology being mysterious. Things like The Ring is just, it gets more prescient as time goes on because people in newer generations might never have even seen a VHS tape. So it's like this lost technology almost. And it's the same with this game. It's a text-based adventure. There's more than just text, but that's the crux of the story, and that's where the mystery evolves from. And it's really interesting. It's super cheap on Switch, and it's on Xbox and PlayStation as well, so pick it up. Number 9 is another newer game, came out a couple years ago. The sequel is actually just about to come out. This is Little Nightmares. It's a cute, on first glance game that's a puzzle platformer. You're a little creature person named Six, and you're walking around an old ship, and you're tiny. Like, all of the other humans are gigantic, and you're just walking around like the size of a mouse and solving puzzles and walking through the ship and trying to find your way out. And it's very cute at first glance, and then as you delve into the game, things get creepier and creepier. It's a relatively short game, but it's also another games on the cheaper side. I think it's $20. I would definitely see if it's on sale. It's also on all modern consoles and PC, so very easy to pick up and try out. Next, we have a little more of an obscure cult classic-y game. This was a game for the PlayStation 2 called Shadow of Destiny. That's what it was called in America. I think in other regions it was called Shadow of Memories. Now, this is not so much a horror game as it is just a mystery where you play a character in early 2000s Germany. It was present day at the time. Who walks out of a diner and is killed by a man in a mask. And then you are resurrected by a homunculus, and you have to travel through time in order to find out who murdered you and stop it. And there's all kinds of branching paths in the story using time travel, and it's just this very, like, even though it's some of it is set in modern day, it's a very old school, like, almost Victorian era type of, like, chilling vibe. It's very good if you're in the mood for just sort of a classic, like, Hammer horror vibe. It's quite good. But, like I said, it came out on the PS2, so some of these games might be a little harder to find, especially the niche ones like this. Now, next up is another game for the PS2. This is Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. This is another game that might be a little harder to find, but I do believe it was remade for the Wii, so that's a little bit better than PS2. Now, this game is very interesting. It's styled like it came out in the early 2000s, so it's styled very modern Japanese horror, like The Ring, The Grudge. These movies were very popular, and they created a lot of games in that same style. And this is one of them. But what makes this one interesting is you do not attack them. It's a game where you're fighting off supernatural entities. They're like ghosts or spirits, and it's a very ritualistic type of story where you're trying to stop a summoning ritual sacrifice, basically. But the way you combat the ghosts is by taking pictures of them. And so you have something called the camera obscura, and it's you take pictures, and it damages the monsters, and that's how, and it lights up the room, and it just creates this oppression of you don't have a way to attack. This is your only way to attack, and it is very stress inducing, and for a horror video game, that's quite good. It's another one of those cult classics that might be a little hard to find, might be a little expensive, but it is one of the best Japanese horror games that I have ever played. Next up, we have number 6, which is an Xbox 360 game, actually, called Alan Wake. Now, this was made by Remedy, which has gotten super popular as a company. They just recently put out a game called Control, which is getting lots of good press. And it has actually a little bit of a connection to this game. This is an older game called Alan Wake. It's styled like a mystery TV show where each part of the game actually has chapters or episodes with its own story and cliffhanger. And it's also highly inspired by Stephen King, and if you know me, that's one of my favorite authors. And the story is basically you play a writer named Alan Wake who starts realizing that a book he wrote that he can't remember writing, but he did write it, seems to be coming true, and he's being attacked by these shadow monsters. And you basically go from there and trying to solve the mystery. Another interesting aspect of this game is you have a flashlight that you use to light up the area around you, and you have to collect batteries throughout the game as pickups, and if you don't get enough of those batteries, your flashlight will run out and you will be left without light, and it just makes the game that much harder. I don't know about right now, but a couple years ago, this was super easy to find in GameStops for like $5. Xbox 360 games were a bit of a dime a dozen. See if you can find it. Pick it up. It's a great title for a good time. So number 5 on the list is another Japanese horror-inspired game called Siren. This was a PS2 game that I had a lot of fun with. I was super floored by the graphics when this game first came out. It was in the early 2000s. It's, instead of creating polygonal characters, it would actually take pictures. This was like before mocap was normal. It would take pictures of actors and map those pictures onto the faces of the characters. It just made things look, gave things an uncanny valley aspect to it that just made it super creepy. And the point of this game is another supernatural horror where you are investigating a ghost town, and you are attacked by these creatures called Shirobito, which are basically zombie-esque. But what's interesting about this game is you have a psychic power that you can travel into the eyes of these enemies and see what they're seeing, and use that to figure out where they are, figure out where they're going, and get around them, because you have very limited combat ability. So the point of the game is to get out alive while using your knowledge of what they're doing to avoid them. It's more of a stealth game, and it's actually really unsettling, especially if you look at some of the cutscenes on YouTube. If you want to check it out, those mapped faces just look so weird, and that just adds to the horror. So from here on out, things are about to get a little more basic, and you realize that I actually like some pretty popular games too. Next up is a GameCube game called Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. Now, this was an interesting title. One, this was published by Nintendo. It's their first M-rated game they ever published. And it's a horror game where you're another game where you're unraveling a mystery. Oh, I like those, I guess. And you have a bunch of different playable characters that are all have their own timeline, so it bounces back and forth between like modern day all the way to like the 1500s, and it goes out of chronological order, and you solve this vast mystery. And at the same time, what makes this game interesting is something called the sanity meter. As things go on and things get creepier, your sanity meter goes up, and when it gets too high, you are going insane, and you start to hallucinate. Walls bleed, things appear and disappear, and fourth wall breaking effects start to happen. Like the volume on your TV will go down, or it'll start changing channels and trying to trick you into thinking there's something wrong with the TV. And that's just something that when I was a kid I had never seen before, and I fell in love with it. So if you can track down this game on the GameCube, I would highly recommend it. Number 3 is a PlayStation 1 game called Parasite Eve. Now, this was a game made by Square Enix, or, well, at the time it was Squaresoft. They had never made a game like this before, and they rarely make anything like it after either. And it's a game that takes place in modern-day New York, and you play a detective who is on trying to find a woman named Eve who has something inside her DNA that mutated her into this giant monster that wants to destroy all humans and make them burst into flames, basically. It's a very strange, very weird game. It's another one of those games inspired by The Ring and all those other Japanese supernatural horrors of the late 90s and early 2000s. And it was very interesting because it was a kind of a baby between Resident Evil and Final Fantasy. It was a horror game, very aesthetically terrifying, but with a turn-based battle system. You could actually run around in the field, but you had a bar that filled up that allowed you to attack. And so the bar would fill up, you'd shoot your gun, and then you'd have to dodge enemy attacks until it was your turn again. It was very interesting, and it's not something you see very often, and that's why it's so good. Not to mention, just the story is just bonkers, but I'm not going to spoil any more. Check it out. Now, number 2 and number 1 are everyone's picks, basically, but I only wanted to pick one game from each series, so these are my favorite representatives from each of these series, but it by no means means that the other games in these series are bad to me. Like these are the heavy hitters, obviously. But first, before I go into those, I wanted to talk a little bit about some honorable mentions. For me personally, there are 3 games that I wanted to talk about in particular: Clock Tower 3, Five Nights at Freddy's, and PT. Now, these are games that I have seen on the internet. I have watched people play them, and I am enraptured by these games, especially the story of games like PT and Five Nights at Freddy's. Like, the background lore is just so interesting to me. But I can't put these on the list because I've never played these games before. Especially PT was just a demo that has been since delisted, so I'll never be able to play that. But those are other games that, from what I've seen, also fall into my area of interest, so maybe check those out too if you're looking for some extra spookiness. Now, number 2 pick, Resident Evil 2. This game is obviously a classic. Sweet Home created the survival horror genre, but this one basically perfected it. I know lots of people don't like the tank controls. I never had a problem with them, but this game is just so much fun. It's got a great story, especially if you're into like B movies. It has a very B movie horror vibe. Great action, lots of good puzzle solving, exploration. It basically has everything you want in a horror game, and I don't have much to say about it just because it's so basic. Everyone's played this game, so it's on pretty much every system. You can get it digitally for the PS4, but it was originally a PlayStation 1 game, and just pick it up, play it if you haven't. It's perfect. And the number one pick, I'm sure everyone who knows horror games saw this coming, saw at least one of these games coming on this list. And for me personally, my favorite horror game of all time is the original Silent Hill. I know everyone's going to say, wait, what about Silent Hill 2? Silent Hill 2 is also amazing, but I just personally have a better connection with the original Silent Hill. I played this so much when I was a kid. It was originally on the PlayStation 1, but like Resident Evil 2, it's been released on pretty much every PlayStation after that, and several other consoles as well. So super easy to get, super easy to pick up. The graphics are strange, and I think that's a good thing. Like, it's very low polygon, original PlayStation graphics, and it just creates this, like I said before when Stories Untold, it creates this unsettling nature of lost technology. And there's so many details that's put into this game, just things that you wouldn't even be able to get to. Like, off in the distance, these characters and posters and all kinds of weird things that the developers decided to put just in case you noticed it. And that makes it interesting to me, and that makes it unsettling, because it gives this idea that this world is living even beyond what the developers wanted you to see. And it just, oh my god, I personally, so there's this one part in the game, I'm going to spoil a little part of the game, where I'm usually pretty good about finding directions in video games. I can map things out in my head pretty well. And there's one part in the game where you're in a school and you go into a bathroom, and there's nothing in the bathroom. It's just a normal room. And once you go out of the bathroom, you're in a completely different floor of the school. And there's no indication that this happened, it just did happen. And that just adds into this unsettling nature that permeates the entire game. That's just like, anything can happen, you are not okay, you are not safe. And I can play it over and over again. I've played it so many times. Another great thing about the game is there's all kinds of unlockables. You beat the game enough times, and you get really cool stuff like a katana or a laser gun, just for fun, because you've mastered the game, so why not have a little fun? But beyond that, yeah, those are my top 10 games. You know, I would love to have some gameplay showing for these, but I can't do that yet. If any of these interested you, check them out, please. And basically, if you liked this video, you want to see more of me doing stuff like this, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check my socials down at the bottom of the description, Instagram, Twitter, and happy Halloween! And I hope to see you guys and girls and everyone else in my next video. So, see you later.